Homes swept away, communities left isolated, and over 1,000 deaths confirmed.
Everything was washed away in the second wave. It came after 45 minutes. For 45 minutes, my children were alive. My wife is gone. My 2 grandchildren, even the local monk cried for my family.
A battering of cyclones on parts of Asia in the past week has brought mass flooding and displaced millions. In Sri Lanka, the extreme weather has caused devastating mudslides, creating a humanitarian emergency.
All the vegetable crops got washed away. I don't know how are we going to have, we will not have vegetables for 2-3 months, or fruits.
But in a country that is no stranger to flooding, why has this storm been so catastrophic?
Warmer oceans are feeding these storms with greater moisture, and that is why perhaps there wasn't that warning, because it did seem like this cyclone would just be another regular cyclone that they do experience at this time of year.
I'm Daniel Hewitt, and this is what you need to know. Joining me today from Colombo in Sri Lanka is our Asia correspondent, Debi Edward. Debi, thank you for joining us. You've seen the aftermath of Cyclone Ditwa close up in Sri Lanka. First, can you set the scene for us? Where did you go in Sri Lanka and what's it been like?
We went to the city of Kandy, which is in the central highlands, right in the heart of the island of Sri Lanka. It is an ancient capital. It is for many the spiritual and cultural capital of Sri Lanka. It is in the central highlands, a very mountainous, very lush part of the country, filled with tea plantations. Sri Lanka's famous Ceylon tea comes from there. Many tourists might know it is very popular with tourists. It has this ancient train line that runs from Kandy with these iconic blue carriages. But that train line itself has been a victim of this cyclone. The tracks were destroyed. Those trains are no longer running. The similar situation with the roads. We drove from the capital, Colombo, to Kandy, a journey that usually take maybe 3 or 4 hours. It took us almost 6. And all along that journey, we could see several houses, several communities that had been hit by landslides or flooding. But we wanted to get to Kandy because Kandy and that central part of Sri Lanka bore the brunt of this storm.
We're speaking almost a week since the cyclone first hit. How many people have been affected in Sri Lanka?
At this point, the death toll stands at 479, with 350 people still missing. But as you say, a week on, it is now presumed that most of those 350 people are now presumed dead, and almost 2 million people have been affected by this cyclone. Thousands of people have been left homeless. We met many of them. We traveled to 2 villages, one to the north of Kandy, one to the south. In the north village, that has been completely cut off. A landslide ruptured the main access road to the village. There's only one way up and one way down that hill, and now there's absolutely no accessibility. We had to get there by walking through the forest, walking through a path. And when we got there, it just looked like an earthquake had struck. The road was cracked, the houses were cracked, and people said at the time that it did actually feel like an earthquake had struck. So heavy was the rain, so powerful was then the landslide, that it really felt like the earth was moving. The man we spoke to there, Mohan, said he'd never been afraid in his life until that night, until he had to run for his life. And sadly, 7 people in that village did die, and more than 30 were injured. In the second village we went to, which was south of Kandy, that's where we met Manoharan and Seydou Mohammed. We'd actually stopped to ask for directions because we'd heard about this village that had been severely damaged. And the man who gave us directions was Manoharan, and he told us that it was his house that had been destroyed. It was his mother and his sister that he'd lost. So he took us down the hill to show us what had happened. And when we came up this hill and round the corner, it was just a scene of utter devastation. There was what apparently had been a row of houses, and all that was left was a wall, a damaged wall at one end and a damaged wall at the other. Manoharan's house has been completely wiped out. His mother and his 16-year-old sister dead. And next door, he'd lost his aunt, his grandmother, and his two young nieces, a 7-year-old girl and a 6-month-old baby. At the other end of the village, that was where Seydou Mohammed's house was. He lived next door to his daughter. He'd been working in Kandy at the time when this happened. He described it as having happened in 2 waves. He said the first wave, his family were able to get out of their house. They were shouting for rescue, screaming about what had happened. And then this second, bigger deluge came and they just stood just no chance. And he's lost his wife, his 2 children, both of his grandchildren. It's just absolutely heartbreaking to see their faces, to see them looking down on that mass of mud and just having lost everything and everyone that they loved.
God, it's absolutely horrific. And the places you've been and the families you've met, what help are they getting? Is it anywhere near enough?
Some food aid is starting to come into those villages, but particularly difficult for those villages like that first one that we went to that are completely cut off. There are still so many communities that are just inaccessible, that are only accessible by chopper. So you're seeing these Sri Lankan army helicopters, they're being supported by teams from the Indian and Pakistani military too, and they're having to airlift support, airlift food, airlift water into these communities. Thousands of people still waiting for food aid, for medical supplies, and for support with their rescue efforts. We actually went to visit one very small volunteer relief center in Kandy, and they said they were providing more than 2,000 meals a day. They started by handing out rice and water, but then they realized that so many of these people don't really have the means yet to cook. They don't have any electricity. So now they're handing out these thousands of meals a day. But it's a very slow process, partly, Dan, because it's such a large scale disaster. Usually with these things, we were told it affects a singular part of the country, but almost the entire island has been affected by this.
Sri Lanka has had lots of flooding before, but the impact of this cyclone, as you've been describing, has been almost unprecedented. Why has it suffered so badly this time?
Well, I think there are various factors that play here. The first, which many people were saying to us, was there was no warning. They were not told that this cyclone coming was potentially going to be so catastrophic. They weren't given any evacuation orders. They weren't told to shelter in place. And the second factor is climate change. Warmer oceans are feeding these storms with greater moisture. So what can be just a moderate cyclone can carry a catastrophic volume of rainwater. And that is why perhaps there wasn't that warning, because it did seem like this cyclone would just be another regular cyclone that they do experience at this time of year, but it turned out to be catastrophic. And the other factor is that countries like Sri Lanka, in particular, with such a fragile economy, they just don't have the resources to build the infrastructure that's now required for these extreme weather events. Cyclones do happen here. They're not growing in number, but they are growing in intensity. And countries like Sri Lanka just don't have the drainage systems. They don't have slope gradation. They don't have evacuation systems in place. They haven't been able to provide that kind of infrastructure that's now required to cope with these extreme weather events.
And Sri Lanka's monsoon season is still to come. What further damage could that do?
Yeah, the monsoon season for the north and central parts of the country runs from December to March. So they're just praying that there is a respite in some of the rains to come. Some of the buildings that we saw, Dan, just looked like they could collapse at any minute. Mohan, that we spoke to in that first village, he said he felt like the ground was still moving. He was worried about any small amount of rain that might tear the remaining houses off that hillside. So, at this time, the government is talking about a $7 billion rebuild project. A woman I spoke to said this is a country that's going to have to start from scratch, but it is actually even 7 days on just too soon to talk about rebuilding. The priority still now at this moment is the recovery operation, is the relief operation that is still so acute.
Debi in Colombo in Sri Lanka. Thank you very much for that. And if you want more independent, eyewitness, on-the-ground reporting like that, and the analysis that comes with it, you should subscribe to the ITV News YouTube channel, and you should head to itv.com/news. But until our next briefing, thank you very much for joining us.